right. Well, thank you very much, Adnan, for that presentation. It is going to be interesting because I have the Sa'ana manuscripts in my presentation as well, and I'll be wondering if there's any loud takbirs at the end when you discover that the actual original writings of Sa'ana are different than what you have now. That'll be interesting to look at. Now, the key to this second debate is to apply the same standards here that we should have been using in the examining of the New Testament. Was the transmission of the Quran a free transmission or a controlled transmission? I think we have already actually come to the conclusion on that. We recognize that it is a controlled transmission. Now, a quote for you from Matsar Qadsi. He says, Muslims and non-Muslims both agree that no change has ever occurred in the text of the Quran. The above prophecy for the eternal preservation and purity of the Quran came true not only for the text of the Quran, but also for the most minute details of its punctuation marks as well. It is a miracle of the Quran that no change has occurred in a single word, a single letter of the alphabet, a single punctuation mark, or a single diacritical mark in the text of the Quran during the last 14 centuries. That's the claim that I think a lot of Muslims here tonight believe. But at this point, there is truly no question, as scholarly sources, Islamic and non-Islamic, both attest to the exact same story. And there's a massive difference between what Islamic scholars say and what many Muslims believe on this particular matter. For example, in 2007, there was a publication, the Top Copy manuscript. I have a copy of this publication, and here you have one of the charts that is produced. There are 3 pages of these charts showing the variant readings between major manuscripts of the Quran. This is an Islamic produce. This is from Muslim scholars in Turkey showing the variations in these mushaf in regards to the text of the Quran. I didn't produce this. They did. And there's 3 pages of them. You can look at that for yourself. But I need to show these to you. I want to get to the real issue, which is the means of transmission. But the fact that there are textual variants has to be recognized. Because what you just did, I could put P66 up on the screen. Maybe I'll do this in my rebuttal period. I could put P66 up on the screen and read it to you in Greek, and it'll be exactly what's up there too. That doesn't prove much. The question is what's in that manuscript what was originally written by the author? That's the issue we need to be dealing with tonight, not anything else. Okay? So let's try to keep the emotions to themselves. Look at Surah 3:158. Here is a variant that's found in Surah 3:158. Let's sort of blow it up here so you can see it. Here's the text under consideration, which speaks of Allah surely gathering those who die to himself. Here is the same text from Quranic manuscript 328, which is found in the National Library of France in Paris. It is dated to around 100 years after Hijrah. But as reading Hijazi text is hard even for those who read modern Arabic, let's expand the text out a little bit so you can see it. Now, what you can see is that the Paris manuscript has an extra aleph, not found in the modern printed Quranic text. But in this case, that extra aleph completely changes the meaning. In the ancient text, it says those who die will not be gathered to Allah, while the modern 1924 printed text, which I would imagine most Muslims in the audience have, says that they will surely be gathered to Allah. Now, please, make sure you understand why I point this out. I'm not saying we can't figure out the original wording, but I am pointing out how important it is to have a full, unedited, widely dispersed manuscript tradition with which to make such determinations. That is very, very important. Likewise, Surah 2, 222. You were just looking at Surah 2, 265. All right. Surah 2, 222. Let's look at it in the Fogg's palimpsest manuscript and also bring in the Sa'ana manuscripts as well. Surah 2, 222 provides another example, this time based upon Fogg's palimpsest manuscript. A palimpsest is a manuscript where the original writing has been washed off in another version or completely different work written on the washed leather. Using ultraviolet light, we can often read the original writing. When we read the original text in the Fogg's manuscript of Surah 2, 222, which I have here on the top, and compare the current edition, we see not just variation, we see wholesale editing. Words are changed, the word order is changed, verbal forms are altered, grammatical terminations are changed, etc. This is clear evidence of the continued attempt, at least a century after Uthman, of ridding the Quran of the readings of Ibn Masud. But even more vital is the fact that a palimpsest portion of the Sa'ana manuscripts, which have been radiocarbon dated, as Adnan was pointing out, to have a better than 50% chance of being pre-Uthmanic in date, contain a third reading of this text, which is different from both the Fogs and the Uthmanic readings. Now, this is evidence of text types, just as we will see both Bukhari and Al-Kindi record for us as we look through their texts. So here we have evidence in the palimpsest of preceding text types even before the Uthmanic text that exists that you were just reading and saying, see, nothing has changed. Well, how did that text get on there before there that was different? There was a redaction. There was an editing. And I want to know what was originally given, not what somebody else thought should have been given. And that's why the free transmission of the text is so superior to any controlled transmission of the text. Now, let's look at what Sahih al-Bukhari says about where the Quran came from. This is the earliest sources we have, many of the sources. Many of the sources. You have to have two manuscripts, and they had to be... Those are later traditions. Oh, you can talk all about isnad chains you want. Every single hadith that Bukhari and Imam rejected had an isnad chain. There were thousands of them. No one that I know of, and nobody that Adnan quotes in regards to history that he was using against the New Testament would ever accept the idea of isnad chains as the standard of historical research. They would never accept it. Again, we need to use the same standards. Now, you know the text, Sahih al-Bukhari 6, 509 and 510. Narrated Zayd bin Thabit, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq sent for me when the people of Yamama had been killed, that is, a number of the Prophet's companions who fought against Musaylimah. Abu Bakr then said to me, Umar has come to me and said, casualties were heavy among the Qurra of the Quran, that is, those who knew the Quran by heart, on the day of the Battle of Yamama, and I am afraid that more heavy casualties may take place among the Qurra on other battlefields whereby a large part, kathir, large part of the Quran may be lost. This has nothing to do with pronunciation. Why in the world would these people be afraid that a large part of the Quran is going to be lost? And actually, we have the entire thing written down. We even actually have all the verses, all the ayahs and everything. It's all been written down. We've got all this, but it's the pronunciation we're worried about. That is not a meaningful reading of the original, and there are many Islamic scholars that would agree with that. That's not a meaningful reading of the original. There was a concern that the Quran would be lost because the Quran was not yet written down. That's why there was a concern. Therefore, I suggest you, Abu Bakr, order the Quran be collected. I said to Umar, how can you do something which Allah's apostle did not do? Umar said, by Allah, it is a good project. Umar kept on urging me to accept his proposal until Allah opened my chest for it, and I began to realize the good in the idea which Umar had realized. Okay? So, he says, I started looking for the Quran and collecting it from what was written on palm stalks. Why didn't he just go and get the original that was already there with all the ayahs and everything all there? No, he goes looking for the Quran and collecting it from what was written on palm stalks, thin white stones, doesn't sound like a mushaf to me, and also from the men who knew it by heart. Oh, so all of it wasn't written down, till I found the last verse of Surah At-Tawbah, repentance, with Abi Kuzami al-Ansari, and I did not find it with anybody other than him. One person knew this text. One. What about those 70 others that died at Yamama? Did any of them know some that nobody knew? That's a question that has to be asked. It can't just be swept under the rug. It has to be asked. And we're going to find out in the next hadith that even at this point, this is right at the days of Abu Bakr, this is right after the death of Muhammad, 18 years later or so, 15 to 18 years later, they're going to find another verse that they didn't find the first time around. And this is your own hadith sources. I'm just quoting it, what it says. The verse that they found with one person was, verily there has come unto you an apostle Muhammad from amongst yourselves that grieves him that you should receive any injury or difficulty till the end of Surah Al-Tawbah. So there you have the last one found with one person. Then the complete manuscripts, copy of the Quran, remained with Abu Bakr till he died, then with Umar till the end of his life, and then with Hafsa, the daughter of Umar. So there's the first collation of Abu Bakr. Next hadith. Hudayfa bin al-Yaman came to Uthman. Hudayfa was afraid of the people of Sham and Iraq's differences in the recitation of the Quran. Not just the pronunciation, how they were reciting it. There were differences. Why would that cause anybody a problem? Well, because they didn't have a fixed manuscript yet. And so they come traveling back and they say, Uthman, O chief of the believers, listen to what's said here. save this nation before they differ about the book, the Quran, as the Jews and Christians did before. Oh, so we don't want to have any differences. We don't want to have any argumentation. So we need one fixed version. There's a problem here. So we need to have one fixed version. So Uthman sent a message to Hafsa saying, send us the manuscripts of the Quran so we may compile the Quranic materials in perfect copies and return the manuscripts to you. So Hafsa sent it to Uthman. Now, let me just ask you a question. If all they did was take what was from the days of Abu Bakr and reproduce it, this shouldn't have taken much difficulty at all. There shouldn't have been any more collation. They shouldn't be looking for new ayahs. But that's not what happens. In fact, Uthman then ordered Zayd bin Thabit, then you have the entire committee here, to rewrite the manuscripts in perfect copies. And why would Uthman say to the three Qurayshi men, in case you disagree with Zayd bin Thabit on any point in the Quran, then write it in the dialect of Quraysh. The Quran was revealed in their language. Wait a minute, I thought you were just recopying what you already had. Why would you be worried about something like this? Didn't you do this back at the original collation? Sounds like something more is going on here. And it actually indicates very clearly they did so. And when they had written many copies, Uthman returned the original manuscripts to Hafsa. Uthman sent to every Muslim province one copy of what they had copied and ordered that all the other Quranic materials, whether written in fragmentary manuscripts or whole copies, be burnt. That is a redaction. That is an editing. And that stops the level of certainty you can have in a transmitted text at that point, if he was in fact successful and destroyed everything that came before. I don't think he was. But we know that he couldn't have been because Ibn Masud wouldn't give up his manuscript. That's why we have evidence of Ibn Masud's readings. But if he had been successful, that's as far as you could trace the text of the Quran back, and you just simply have to believe Uthman and his committee got it perfectly right. Was Uthman a prophet? Was Zayd bin Thabit a prophet? Were they sinners? I can understand if you said that Muhammad did this and he has inspiration. This is coming a lot longer. And folks, if you know your history, you know that right now there is tremendous tension in the Islamic Ummah between Umar and Ali that's going to result in what? The very same tensions you have today. You know that's what was going on back then. And don't you think that would have an impact on what Uthman does with the Quran and the compilation of the Quran? I think you really know that. Zayd bin Thabit added, oh, by the way, a verse from Surah Azab was missed by me. When we copied the Quran, I used to hear Allah's apostle reciting it, so we searched for it, and guess what? We found it with Kazimi bin Thabit al-Ansari, and the verse was, among the believers are men who have been true to their covenant with Allah in Surah 33. So that ayah had just been left out in the cold for about 18 years. And now it is put in. How many ayah were lost at the Battle of Yamama? This text raises the question. The result was that in the caliphate, now here, let me switch over. Sorry, I skipped too quickly here. We can demonstrate that the traditions that Bukhari gives us were well known even outside the Islamic community. One of the earliest writers against Islam as a Christian was named Al-Kindi. And around the time of 820 AD or so, he has an exchange, a written exchange with a Muslim. And the result is one of the most insightful encounters that we have. It's extremely important for us to look at this kind of information. Here's what he writes to his Islamic friend on this subject, and notice the parallels to Bukhari. The result was that in the caliphate of Uthman, it was discovered that there was no consensus to the true text. One man then read one version of the Quran, his neighbor another, and they differed. One man said to his neighbor, my text is better than yours, while his neighbor defended his own. So additions and losses came about, and falsification of the text. Uthman was told that various versions were in use, that the text was being tampered with, and that strife with all the mischief of party spirit was being engendered. They said, we do not believe that matters can continue as they are. It is an affair of urgency. They are slaying one another. The sacred book is corrupted. A second apostasy is imminent. So there is great concern, just as Bukhari says, great concern that we don't want to be like the Jews and the Christians. And so this is in the time of Uthman. Now, Ubay, the son of Ka'b, was dead before it was made, while Ibn Masud refused to give up his copy of the Quran. Now remember, what did Muhammad say in the Hadith? If you want to know the Quran, he pointed to 4 people. What was one of them? Ibn Masud. Zayd bin Thabit was not one of them. And so I can imagine, if you've ever read any of the hadith that come from Ibn Masud, this guy, he was a man's man, you know what I mean? I mean, this guy, he had a backbone. And I don't think he appreciated being left out of the compilation of the Quran. Because Muhammad himself had said, this guy knows the Quran. And he was left out of it. So can you imagine when Uthman comes along, Muhammad hadn't said Uthman was the best, and Uthman comes along and says, give me your manuscript, I'm going to destroy it. Abdullah ibn Masud says, I don't think so. And in fact, because of that, his readings continue in the manuscript tradition for hundreds of years, especially in the palimpsest manuscripts. So they drove him from his post in Kufa and appointed Abu Musa as governor in his place. In fact, some historical sources say he was beaten because he would not give up his mushaf. There's differences about that particular issue. When the revision had been completed according to the various manuscripts, 4 copies were made in large text, one of which was sent to Mecca, a second remained in Medina, a third was sent to Syria and is today in Malatya. In fact, Al-Kindi goes through a whole story of what happened to each one. It's amazing the type of information that he had about this particular situation. When the next Uthman gave directions, the leaves and sheets of the Quran should be gathered in from the provinces. He ordered his agents to collect all that they could lay their hands on and destroy them till it should be certain that not a sheet remained in the possession of any private individual. That is the very definition of a controlled transmission. That's like the government come along and saying, we now have the official version of the Bible, give us all yours. You can trust us. Sorry, I don't see Abdullah ibn Masud doing that. There are hadith where he tells the people of Kufa, don't give up your mushaf. There were divisions, there were differences. If it was all the same Quran with no differences, why are there these divisions? Interesting question. Heavy penalties were threatened against the disobedient. All the leaves they could secure were shredded and boiled in vinegar till they were sodden. Nothing remained, not even the smallest fragment that could be deciphered. That is the Uthmanic revision. And that is a tremendous disruption in the transmission of the Quran. And by the very standards that Adnan used, it makes the Quran corrupt and untrustworthy. Now, I don't say that. I'm not making that because I don't use that kind of radical, unsubstantiatable standard. I don't know any scholar that does. But that's what we had being used from the New Testament. And so I'm just apply the same thing, make sure that we're being fair. Then he finally says to his Muslim friend, you know what happened between Ali, Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman? How they hated each other and quarreled and corrupted the text? How each one tried to oppose his neighbor and to refute what he had said? Pray, how are we to know which is the true text, and how shall we distinguish it from the false one? And there's the question. Why is Ibn Masud wrong? Why are his readings? I mean, scholarly sources will tell you, for example, that in the tafsir of Safyan, very early on, 67 places he mentions a difference in the razm, the actual reading of the text, and attributes them to Ibn Masud. And his is a fairly short tafsir. At that early period of time, they didn't have any problem talking about the fact that there were variations between Ibn Masud. Ubay ibn Ka'b's was primarily the same as Ibn Masud's, but there's some differences there. And now we have the Sa'ana palimpsests, which you just had up on the screen during your presentations, which gives us another reading outside of Abdullah ibn Masud. So we have textual variation. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Which methodology gives us the most certainty as to the real question? Do we possess the original words of the authors we believe to have been inspired of God? Now, you can sit here and say, yes, because we have isnad chains. And if that's good enough for you, I wasted my time for you. Okay? I'm only here for people who really want to know the truth, and you're not going to be satisfied with the answers you already brought in here. Okay? I realize that cuts off some folks, but that's the only way I know how to handle the truth. I can't convince you. I'm not going to try to. But for people who have truth in their hearts and desire to be truthful, the question is, which methodology gives us the most certainty as to the real question? Do we possess the original words of the authors we believe to have been inspired of God? The free transmission of the New Testament text precludes the editing and revision that we just saw. The manuscript tradition shows us tenacity. The original readings still exist. No one could insert the deity of Christ into the text of the New Testament, take out some other doctrine, put some denial of the resurrection or something. They could not do that. The transmission of the text could never allow that to happen. And it's because it was freely transmitted, widely transmitted from the very beginning. But the controlled transmission of the Quran, together with the Uthmanic revision, the possible later work of Abd al-Malik, which I haven't even gotten to this evening, and the evidence of the differing traditions of Ibn Masud, Ubay ibn Ka'b, and possibly others, the Sa'ana readings that we saw, raises serious questions as to the originality of the Uthmanic tradition. At the very least, what I've proven to you is that you have multiple traditions. You've got Uthman, you've got Ibn Masud, and you've got this other reading in Sa'ana, and you've got Ubay ibn Ka'b. You say, well, I like the one. Great, fine. Why? How do you know? What methodology have you used? And it's not chains aren't going to cut that for you, by the way. What methodology does your system provide you to know that that actually represents the original? That is the question for all of us this evening. Islamic scholars and apologists must recognize that merely asserting the perfection of the Uthmanic tradition proves nothing. The realities of the variant traditions must be embraced and examined before the Quran can be proven to have been accurately transmitted. What you need, my friends, is a critical edition of the Quran. Now, for many of you sitting here, you look at our Bibles, and you look at those footnotes, or you look at the UBS 4th edition over there, and he holds it up and says, see all this stuff? These are the variations. And I go, thank God I have that. Because that means no one has been able to get in there and totally change this and fool me. I want that information, and we're wide open about it. Where is your critical Quran? I'm not talking about the 7 Aruf. I'm not talking about that. Where is your critical Quran? Now, there's a project right now called the Corpus Quranicum, but it's primarily Western scholars that are working on it. And there are a lot of people in the Muslim world, they don't support doing that. We don't need to have a critical edition of the Quran. We don't need to be telling people there was a variation at Surah 2, 222. I want to know that. I want to know what John wrote, and I want to know what Mark wrote, and I want to know what the original authors wrote, not what somebody wrote 100 years or 15 years or 500 years later, or what they thought should have been written. I want to know the original. And so what I'm saying to you is, the reason for the debate this evening is to try to bring the facts to light and call for the even scales. If you embrace radical skepticism in regards to the New Testament, you have no reason to believe in the Quran. Adnan wasn't using the same scholarship there. There wasn't one of those scholars that he was quoting that would believe a word he was just saying about, well, you know, we've got these traditions, and they didn't write anything down unless they had 2 copies and all the rest of this stuff. Every single person who, for example, theoretically took the Gospel of John apart and put it into pieces would laugh at such methodology. Not the same standards. And I submit to you that truth is defined by consistency. Truth is defined by consistency. If you use scholarship that is serious in examining sources, tries to be fair, but recognizes that we are creatures of God and God has spoken, that's going to be very different than using naturalistic, materialistic scholarship. Now, you notice, I didn't quote any of the modern scholars that don't believe Muhammad existed. I could have stood up here and done the same thing he did with his liberal scholars and quoted them and said, oh, well, there you go. If you're a real scholar, you don't believe Muhammad existed, and therefore the Quran is a compilation of many authors. I didn't do that, did I? I can't, because that wouldn't be consistent. That's what we need to be this evening. When Adnan comes up here, if Adnan just simply starts repeating the Uthmanic tradition is it, then I say to you the debate's over. We need to have serious interaction about the methodology that we are using. Thank you very much.